Hey everyone, welcome back to the Patriots Report. My name is Christopher Price, the Boston Globe and bostonglobe.com, joined as always by my podcast partner, Chris Hogan. And Chris, let's get into this right out of the gate because they cut down to 53. We're recording this on Wednesday morning. They cut down to 53 yesterday afternoon, and they have 8 wide receivers. 8 wide receivers. That's a lot of wide receivers. We spent all summer sitting here thinking, okay, well, they're going to go 6 wide receivers or 7 wide receivers. 6 or 7. Is Baker on the roster? What did they do with Polk, Chisholm? Bourne, all of them. They kept them all. They have 8 guys in the roster. Now, look, at this stage of his career, really, I'm going to call Javon Baker the Matthew Slater of the group, where he's basically a wide receiver in name only because he's more of a contributor on special teams. But I want to get your take on the 8 receivers and what that means, or what do you think of it, and what that means for this roster going forward.
Well, I think it's 2 things. They obviously – they had a tough decision to make in that room, and I believe that they probably want to keep those guys. I think the reality is what's going to happen, and this happens really across the league, is they have the guys that they want to keep, they have guys that they want to protect. You're going to see over the next couple of days cuts, ads, practice squad, all these different things, because there's also 31 other teams that let go of players. So the scouting department, Raves, everyone's going to be doing their due diligence on who got cut, who's available, who did we like, who did we see? Was there someone in Washington or Minnesota that we were like, oh man, like really like that guy, he got cut, we could see it practice squad, whatever it is. So I think over the next couple of days you'll see that receiver room get probably. I would have to say it gets cut down to 6. I would say that Josh probably wants to keep 6 guys. I think all signs are pointing to Efton making the team. He's probably going to be that 6th guy. I think that what you're going to see is we've talked about a trade here. We've talked about some different things, whether we're just kind of doing stuff for 2026 and getting, stacking up picks. Probably like you're not going to get much for Kendrick coming off an injury. Maybe that's just like a 7th round pick, or maybe it's just a swap of a player of some sorts. What we're doing here, it could be in a package sort of deal, but there's no way we're going to keep 8 receivers going into a season. There's got to be some other needs, right? I mean, usually you see in the 53 offensive line is kind of stacked with a bunch of guys, so I don't know if there's a need there to add another player that maybe we liked and didn't have a chance to get in the draft or, in free agency. Defensive back is one of those other positions where you really try to stack the position just because it's, listen, injuries are a huge part of the game. And I guess we have our guys at receiver, right? You have our top guys that we're going to use, but the other guys, they're role players, right? And inevitably those guys can be filled by other guys, right? They don't necessarily have to be the guys that we have in the room. So it'll be interesting to see what we do in over the course of the next couple of days, because I do think there's probably going to be some moving parts specifically in that room. But again, listen, man, I mean, you made it 53. Congrats. Whether it was for a few days or you're on the move to another team, like that's a huge accomplishment. I mean, shout out to Efton, undrafted guy. I mean, those guys, I hold a special place for me just because I know how hard it is and how much he had to put in. And trust me, we talked about it last week that the grind does not stop. This is an everyday thing, man. You can't get comfortable just because you made it 53, because the reality is that they're going to be looking for guys all year round, to fill that spot. And if all of a sudden you fall off and you're not producing and giving them what they want, like, you're on the move, man. And so I think, there's got to be, listen, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I do think there's going to be some moving parts here, though.
You got Diggs, Hollins, Pop, Kyle Williams.
There's your 4, right? I mean,
there's your 4 right off the top. Those are your top 4, and then you get Chisholm, Baker, Booty, and Bourne. Yeah. And I think Booty is going to be part of the rotation. Booty had a really good, really strong end of the summer.
I
really
like him.
Played well. Really popped, and he's a guy who is certainly, he has the arrow pointed in the right direction. There are 2 names out there who were cut yesterday, who I think for all the work, not cut yesterday, I shouldn't say that. One guy was cut yesterday, and one guy has demanded a trade, who you could pull a thread and kind of bring him back to New England. Jacoby Myers, who has demanded a new contract in Las Vegas. And
it's 2.0.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just wondering about the redundancy there. And Jakob Johnson, the fullback. And we all know Josh's love of fullbacks. He was cut by Houston. Those are two guys for me that I would keep an eye on if I'm a Patriots fan, to say, hey, I think maybe you could talk him into New England. And then obviously that would change the depth chart, both in the backfield as well as wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I love Jacoby. I enjoyed watching him play in New England and even when he was in Oakland, just because he's another guy that kind of worked his way into a position to, get a contract and create that spot for himself. But I don't know how much he necessarily helps the team if you bring him in, just because him and Pop are identical football players, and to be honest with you, I like Pop. I like where he's been going and his progression as a player. And I think that he's going to have a good year. And I think that he's going to be a solid and consistent contributor on offense. So I don't know if you want to necessarily mess with that flow that you have. Now, again, that's me speaking as a receiver that's been in a room where guys have been brought in where you're just like, I don't know. It's like, do we really need, but listen, the guy's got to make the best decisions, that, they think are good for the team. And Josh obviously has a relationship with Jacoby. So I know Josh obviously would welcome the chance to work with him again, probably. But again, it's like, do you want to mess with, you have a room right now that's filled with some guys that have been grinded this whole summer in the offseason. They've obviously created a decent amount of camaraderie and they have a good, solid room right now. I don't know how much you want to necessarily mess with that, right? Now the fullback is interesting because, I played with James Devlin for years and that position in Josh's offense can be utilized quite a bit. So, that could be definitely a position to watch, if Josh is like, hey man, I need a fullback and I want to use this. And I could definitely see that being a pretty big staple in his offense and in this offense, particularly this year, just to maybe add an extra blocker in there, make sure that they're getting their play action stuff off, just to put a guy in there that's definitely going to be able to do his job. And then, kind of add some added benefit and, whatever it's short yardage, goal line stuff, so there's a lot of benefit to having that, dying fullback position, on your team. But, he's a good player, man. I mean, he's been doing it. And, again, it's like you have to be careful, right? I mean, you have to be careful with who you add at this point in the season, because in those position rooms specifically, right, you have a bunch of guys that have been, been working with Drake, have been doing all these different things. It's like you add a receiver. It's like, okay, well, cool. Now we're adding this on top of Drake's plate. I got to create a whole new chemistry with a whole nother receiver and get this going. And for a young guy, like for Tom, it was like, fine, no good. Like, hey, you're either going to come in here and you're going to have chemistry with me or you're out. Like, and you're not playing, you're not getting the ball. I could care less. But with Drake, there's probably going to be a little bit more like, you're putting a little bit more on top of your shoulders, right? It's like, okay, hey, this guy's going to be in. You need to have this chemistry. You got to put in this extra work. Yada, yada. Like, no, man, I want you to focus on game one, all right? I want to focus on the guys that we have, all right, and go into the season with that. So I think you have to be careful with what you do at this point in the season without even playing a game yet and bringing in some extra bodies. But that being said, listen, if the guys up top think that it's going to be good for this football team, then you're going to have to believe them and trust that they're going to make the right decision.
I should note that they do have an H-back type, a who-man type of guy in camp right now who made the 53 in Jack Westover, who played some tight end, who played a little bit of fullback in the summer, but in my experience was a little bit underwhelming. So that, for me, that's one of the reasons why I bring up the possible Johnson addition, as well as the fact that Josh loves fullbacks, as we all know. I want to ask you, are you surprised that Baker ended up making the roster?
Yeah.
Because he was one of those guys, he was swinging back and forth. And for me, and I think we may have even talked about this, that literally it was series to series. He would drop a pass in 7-on-7s, but then come back 20 minutes later and make a great play.
Yeah.
And then I think ultimately, and we kind of referenced this off the top, that he's kind of a bit of a Matthew Slater type, and that he right now is a wide receiver in name only. He is first and foremost, he is one of your gunners. And if you can get anything out of him offensively, production-wise, then that's all gravy at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Elliott and Mike and the offensive staff definitely, they have to see something, right? And I know we talked about it, right? There's a lot of flashes of being a good receiver and making some big plays, but if he's one of those guys, and that's a path to making the 53. If you're going to be a guy that's going to contribute on, 3 or 4 phases of special teams, then yeah, man, I mean, that's a way of making a roster. So that being said, Matthew, did not just start hey, I'm going to be this all pro special teams guy from day one. I mean, Matthew grinded, and all those guys that play that position that really you're a special teamer, right? I mean, it takes a lot, and you got to be that guy every single day, week in and week out, and really make that splash contributing play on special teams every single Sunday. And if you're not, then there's really no value there, right? There's no, why are we wasting a roster spot on a guy that's kind of, we can just fill a void, fill with somebody else. So Baker, to me, I think he's a practice squad guy. I think that he's a guy that you continue to develop and grow. And, I think the hope is that he turns into the player that, the previous staff drafted him as. And that being said, Elliott and Mike don't have any ties to this kid. So they kept him for a reason, right? They obviously see some sort of potential. And I think we've seen it before. Mike and Elliott really don't have any ties to these kids, right? They got rid of everybody. Everyone's gone. Yeah. So I think that if you're going to keep a guy that you didn't draft and that, obviously struggled the year before, but was a rookie and, kind of shows all these, flashes of being able to be a good player, then yeah, sure. Continue to develop them. Right. I mean, listen, a part of this league is developing these guys and keep guys on your roster that are going to be able to contribute at some point. Right. And a way to do that is put them on the practice squad and let them continue to develop. And then if they need to get called up, hopefully they've done enough and you've developed them enough that they're able to kind of step into that role. So, yeah, I'm happy for the kid. I mean, listen, last year was a disaster for all intent and purposes. Saying that, it was just tough. It wasn't a good year. It was from start to finish. It wasn't great. So, second chance. I'm a big believer in having guys having some second chances here, and the door is still open for him. So at this point, the ball is in his court, man. There's no one else controlling his future than Baker. That's it. I mean, if he's going to come in with a good attitude and want to be able to contribute and come out and play his ass off every single day, then yeah, sure, keep him around. But all of a sudden you start to have a shitty attitude and you're like, well, why am I not here? Then nah, bro, move on. Go find somewhere else and let's get a guy in here that wants to be here.
To his credit, he did display the realization. I think he's self-aware enough to know that he needed to do something extraordinary, something different, something outside the box if he wanted to make this team. I also think that I don't believe that he could have gotten through to the practice squad. I think he showed enough that some other team would have picked him up. And I think that was the concern with them. They had a year invested in him, and they said, look, we've gotten him to this point. We've made him a semi-important special teams player who's going to be playing, a core special teams player for us this year. He's going to have a lot of different roles. If we get something out of him from an offensive perspective, it's great. But right now, let's keep the expectations on him as modest as possible. So I think that's good to take into the season. Given the way they were used over the course of the summer, Duggar and Jennings particularly, were you surprised that they ended up keeping them around? I think Duggar's inability to move, or the inability to move Duggar, I should say, maybe had something to do with his contract. and the Patriots' inability, they weren't going to eat the money. And there were a few different reports out there about, was he on the block? Was he not on the block? Were you surprised at all that those guys are back? Two former Belichick guys who, for all intents and purposes, were on the practice bubble, were on the roster bubble going into Tuesday's cutdown.
Yeah, I mean, I like Duggar. I mean, I've always liked him. I've liked watching him for the past couple of years because I thought that he was just one of those guys that was always around the football and seemed like he had a good knack for playing the safety position. It is a new system and a new coaching staff, and maybe it's just taking some time. But I think going into the season, I think it's good to have a guy like that's going to be able to contribute on defense, and I think that this will, I would hope, pay off, keeping him around and keeping him on the roster. So again, it's like we haven't played any football yet. So, we can all make these assumptions and scrutinize and critique the 53 of who we kept and who we didn't keep. But the reality is we're not really going to know what this team looks like until week 1 of the season. And maybe not even week 2, 3, 4, right? I mean, we need to see,
till week 5, really.
We need to see what this team is made of and how this team is going to shape out. I mean, Duggar, Jennings, those guys are on the bubble. Like maybe they're not there in a couple of weeks because it's just not working out, and they're not really being the type of player. And then it's all of a sudden, it's just, you kind of cut your losses with a guy that's not going to, A, maybe doesn't want to be there, and B, it's just not the type of player that you kind of all intended him to be. So, that's part of this business and part of Elliott. That's why Elliott and Mike have those jobs, right? I mean, they have to kind of make those decisions. And, he did. I think he earned the contract that he got. But again, it's, if you can't move him and no one wants him, but he's not really producing, then, I don't know, stick him on the practice squad or something, like, put him away and don't waste the roster spot and put someone up there that you want, so there's a lot more options on the table nowadays for guys, and the wiggle room that, GMs have with the rosters, just because you can put guys on the practice squad that, and you can keep a lot of them, and they can be on there for their entire career. I mean, for me, it was like there was a deadline. It was like, dude, if you didn't make it 53 in 3 years, like, see you later. Like you couldn't do it. So, it'll be interesting. Again, like we just said, I think that we have to kind of get into the real game situations to kind of see how this team shapes out and see who's really going to be the main contributors on offense and defense.
Duggar, for me, was maybe the most compelling guy of this past summer because he was very forthcoming with us when we spoke with him about the things that he needed to do, the things he needed to improve upon in a new defensive scheme. And then Mike also brought up the fact that, look, this is a guy who had major ankle surgery over the offseason, and he's continuing to work his way back. He's not the same player that he was. I don't know if you ever went through this, but I'm curious from a player's perspective. And I asked him a little bit about this earlier in the summer, where he had to transition from being a point in his career where he couldn't rely solely on the physical anymore. And he had to rely a little bit more on his veteran savvy and film study. Not to say that he wasn't all into film study before, but I guess my larger point is, do you remember making that transition where you could not necessarily do something physically that you could once do, and you had to maybe think in your head, okay, I need to rely on pre-snap thoughts, film, playbook, all that? Or maybe did you know someone who went through that transition late 20s, early 30s in an attempt to stay in the league?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Father Time is the only one that's undefeated. He's remains undefeated and will always be undefeated. I mean, at least for most of us, maybe not for Brady's sake. I mean, I could probably still come out there and, win a championship. But, yeah, I mean, listen, my last couple of years in the league, I was always a guy that could come out every single day and feel good, or convince myself that I felt good and, it'd be okay. But, there was some moments that I had the last, my last couple of years of my career where it was tough. going out there every single day. And I remember being in New Orleans and, having to, ask the coaching staff, for a vet day, and be like, hey man, like it was 105 degrees down there during training camp. And, I was playing lacrosse, a couple months ago and it was tough for me to go out there every single day. But yeah, I mean, I think a part of being a pro and then as you get older and later on in your career, you do like you get smarter, right? You don't have to go out there and bash your head against these guys every single play. And no, you rely a little bit more on your veteran savvy. So for me, it was like, okay, how do I go about these practices in training camp where it's like, all right, I don't have to necessarily kill myself, but I'm going to be able to maybe use some different releases and use my kind of knowing how to get open versus different coverages where it's not going to be so tasking on my body. So yeah, I mean, I think that every player goes through that at some point in their career. And I think that everyone kind of approaches it differently. For me, it was just, it was more treatment, more time recovering. And then it was also just being smart during practice and knowing when I had to go full speed and knowing how to get myself kind of prepped and warmed up and ready to go when I needed to go. So, it's tough. I'll say that. That's the last thing I'll say is that it's hard to get to that point in your career. But also it's one of those things where it's like you've worked you've been able to play for so long. I was going into my 10th year, 10th, 11th, whatever it was. And, that moment in time is coming for you. And knowing that when it comes and being able to deal with it, that's part of being a professional football player. And that's part of, taking care of yourself and knowing that your limitations and knowing how to deal with that as a player and not just going out there and expecting some, a 34, 33-year-old to go out there and run with a 20-year-old, right? Like there's a big gap there and some, and a lot of miles, that you put on, during the course of your career. So, I think that he'll figure it out, and coming off an injury and coming off surgery is no easy task. And going into a new system and a new team, it's not easy. And I think that you give him some time to kind of get it there. And I think that he could be a very solid contributor on this team.
An old editor once told me it's all about when you get to that age about working smarter, not necessarily working harder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and 100%. Just figuring it out, and just you have, whether it's security, whether it's veteran savvy, whatever the case may be, you just end up ultimately figuring it out. Yep. The season finale of Hard Knocks was on last night. They did Hard Knocks with the Buffalo Bills, and I've always wanted to ask you this question: what did you think of that experience, and what, if any, sort of advice would you give a player who is going through the Hard Knocks experience about how to enjoy it, how to best get through it, and kind of, figure it all out?
Well, know where all the hot mics are. Yeah. So, I mean, they used to have the microphones like in the freaking, the napkin dispensers, right? Like you're sitting down, you're sitting down at lunch and you have to like make sure that, you have to be careful what you say. I can't really say that, although the Hard Knocks experience for me was really beneficial because it put me on the map. I mean, it kind of put my name out there and I was able to be probably in front of more eyes than I was going to be able to do just as a normal no-name player that's, didn't really play much college football and trying to make a name for himself. So in that light, it was it was great for me. But I can't really say that I really enjoyed it because I didn't really I didn't really think about it. For me, it was like, okay, cool, there are just extra cameras around. But the reality was I was trying to make a roster and trying to prove, to this team that I belonged here and that I was able to be there. So I think my suggestion and my advice is, block it out as much as possible, and focus because you're not there to be on HBO Hard Knocks. You didn't sign up for that. You signed up to try to make a football team. So block out all the extra noise and their stupid puff pieces that they're doing because in it's like a freaking drama at this point. that's what Hard Knocks is. And it's like, okay, cool. Let's just watch we'll watch, Josh Allen, and we'll get some funny tidbits there, but then we're gonna follow a couple of practice squad guys and we're gonna film them getting their freaking legs cut out from underneath them and their dreams crushed. Like that's not good TV to me. I don't enjoy watching guys lose their jobs, and I think that's like what Hard Knocks has kind of become, and I don't really love that. I'd rather just keep the eyes on their best players and make it funny and entertaining, and you can do all the cinematic things that you do and make it all like real intense during their practices, and see guys diving and the slow motion bullshit that they it's like that's great. That's good TV, right? People like to watch the Hard Knock stuff. Like I always love I always see the old clips of like Brian Cushing, a guy that I trained with, and he's a Jersey guy. Like, dude, like that's funny, right? That's good stuff. Like you watch Brian Cushing just go out there saying some just ridiculous things while he's playing, and then also like bashing his head against a guy without his helmet on, like going against their best running back in defensive drills. Like that stuff is fun to watch, but watching guys try to keep their dreams alive and then film them in the GM's office getting their playbooks handed in. Like, I just, that's my opinion. That's one practice squad, past practice squad player and a guy that's been cut 6 times in the league. Like that's my opinion. I don't love to watch that. So again, my advice is block out the noise and probably take it for what it is. And, if you can if you can have some good publicity and you can show yourself in a good light, then great. But don't be an ass on national television, and HBO where millions of people are watching.
What do you get more? Do you get more college lacrosse questions, or just lacrosse questions in general, or more 7-Eleven questions from Hard Knocks?
I mean, I got a lot. I mean, it was probably more lacrosse questions. I mean, there's a funny clip out there. I mean, we were well into training camp, and I can't actually remember the name of our offensive coordinator right now, an older guy. But our receiver coach was talking to him. They were all mic'd up, and my receiver coach was telling them the story of like who I was. The guy was like, wait, what? He played like the guy, my own offensive coordinator, and I don't blame him. Like I don't fault him, but like he didn't even know who I was. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that's where I was in this reality where nobody knew who the hell I was. Even my own coaching staff didn't know who I was. They just knew I was number 81, white guy that wore high white socks and was out there trying to just make a roster and making plays every single day. So. I mean, to this day, throughout my career, it really was more lacrosse questions and how I went from, playing 4 years of college lacrosse and then deciding like, no, I'm going to try to play in the NFL. People are more interested in that whole thought process that I had.
Last question for me. This week, this is a weird week in the National Football League because you have cuts, you have a couple of practices, and then there's kind of a break for Labor Day weekend, and then you jump into regular season mode. These 2 days, they're going to practice in Foxborough today, Wednesday the 27th and Thursday the 28th. Then they're going to cut them loose for 3 days. What's the focus on these 2 days? Are they game planning already for the Raiders? I know Josh is probably, as soon as the schedule came out, was working on stuff, but what's the focus here? Are they starting to kind of look at, okay, here's what Las Vegas is going to do to us. Here's what here's what we're going to try to do to them. Or is it more about, okay, here's the 53. Let's get together. Let's continue. Let's have an extension of training camp and then really start game planning for the Raiders come Monday.
They've been doing Raider stuff for the last 2 weeks. Like I guarantee you that they've split this team up, in the course of the last training camp practices where it was, okay, here are the guys that are going to play in the last preseason game, and here are the guys that are going to start prepping for the Raiders. And I think that these two days they are going to knock out early down. They're going to knock out probably some maybe some third down stuff, or maybe Josh is kind of going to put in some red zone plays, or they're going to work on some things that they're really are just going to be their core plays that they're going to go in throughout the season. But yeah, the prep right now is starting for the Raiders for absolutely. And then when they come back, it's just going to be a reiteration of what's going on. They're going to add some things. I always say Josh is always known for adding plays and making up new plays. And, there was always I always joke, it was like a different playbook every single week. So there's going to be, like right now it's like, okay, we've been gearing up, right? We've been fueling up and things have been quote unquote slow, right? In training camp, we've kind of taken our time, we've gone over things, blah, blah, blah. But, and we'll continue that whole thought process for the next couple of days. But when they come back, I mean, it is like pedal to the metal, full steam ahead. And there is going to be no kind of walking through any more of this stuff. It's like, okay, this is going to be our plays. We're going to walk through them. We're going to go out and practice. We're going to practice them. And we need to nail this stuff. And you've been around Josh long enough, and I've been around him long enough that he doesn't have patience for people that are not going to pick it up and translate it to the practice field. Like, he wants things to be done the right way, and they're going to walk through it. They're going to walk through it again, and they're going to walk through it a third time, and then they're going to go out and practice it. And then guess what? We're going to walk through it again if we make any mistakes, just so that they know there's going to be such an emphasis on making sure that everyone knows what they're doing, especially going into this first game. So there's going to be a lot of time spent, going over, watching film and the game plan and making sure that every single person, offense, defense, special teams, knows what they're doing going into this first game, so that we can kind of, start this season off on the right foot. I mean, I think for all signs are pointing toward this can be a very winnable game, right?
Exactly.
For the first week of the season. And I think you and I talked about it, even in the preseason, wins were important. I think they were. And I think we showed that we were able to go out there and play. And again, it was the preseason, but this first game is a game that I think that this organization, this team, this would be really, really beneficial for them to go out there, play a good football game, and get a W for the first week. And then after that, as we both know, things are going to happen, and we're going to figure out what this team is made of. It could be sloppy football in the first week. It always is, first couple weeks, because these guys haven't played. They haven't played a full game, 4 quarters. So who's going to be able to go out there, make the least amount of mistakes, take care of the football, and then put some points on the board? This is a very winnable game. Very, very winnable. So, and Josh has probably got some insight into some things in Oakland, and we both know that there's just going to be a lot of game planning going on with Rabes and Josh, and so it's listen. I think that this is a game that this team should really go in with a lot of confidence. This is not the New England Patriots of the last couple of years. This is a brand new team. And they should really go out there firing all cylinders and come out hot. And I think that's gonna turn some heads. I do. I really think so across the league, if this team goes out there and continues to play and be the team that we expect them to be.
I love it. Trains leaving the station.
Yeah.
Regular season right around the corner. Are you doing anything fun for Labor Day weekend?
No, just counting down the days till my kids go back to school.
We've all been there. That late August drag.
Woo, it's a grind.
Parents go through, man. It's just cross the days off the calendar. I hear you. Chris Hogan.
Spending time with them. That's about it.
Thank you very much, my friend. Take care, and we will talk again next week.
Sounds good, brother.